The story of the Minotaur is more than a scary bedtime fable. It is a dark labyrinth waiting to be unraveled. We all know the tale of the half-man, half-bull monster trapped in a maze, demanding a terrible sacrifice. But what if this creature was not born from imagination, but from forgotten history? Tonight, we are going to dig deeper than the storybook. We will walk the crumbling corridors of a real ancient palace, decipher the meaning behind sacred bull symbols, and listen for the whispers of a lost civilization buried within the legend. By the end, you will see this famous myth not as mere fantasy, but as a cryptic puzzle box holding truths about a magnificent and mysterious Bronze Age world. What secrets could turn a fairy tale monster into a historical ghost? What do you believe is hidden at the heart of our oldest stories? Our journey begins with the story itself, the one whispered for generations. In the sun-drenched sea of the Aegean, there once ruled a powerful king named Minos, lord of the island of Crete. To prove his divine right to the throne, he prayed to the sea god Poseidon to send him a magnificent bull from the waves, which he promised to sacrifice in return. Poseidon obliged, sending a stunning, snow-white bull. But when King Minos saw its beauty, he could not bear to kill it. He kept the divine bull for himself and sacrificed a lesser one in its place. This act of greed and broken promise was a grave insult to the gods. As punishment, Poseidon inflicted a terrible curse not upon the king, but upon his wife, Queen Pasiphae, filling her with an unnatural and uncontrollable desire for the very same white bull. To help the queen, the king's own brilliant inventor, Daedalus, constructed a hollow wooden cow so realistic it deceived the bull. From this unnatural union, a child was born, but it was no ordinary child. He had the body of a powerful man and the head and tail of a bull. He was the Minotaur, a creature of insatiable hunger, especially for human flesh. Horrified and ashamed, King Minos could not bring himself to kill this monstrous offspring, a product of his own sin. So he commanded Daedalus once more, this time to build a prison so complex no one could ever find their way in or out. Daedalus designed the Labyrinth, a vast, winding maze of endless corridors and dead ends, a masterpiece of confusion. Into its dark heart, the Minotaur was cast, where its roars echoed through the stone passages. Now, King Minos had a son, Androgeos, who traveled to Athens and was killed there. Enraged, Minos waged war on Athens and won. As part of the brutal peace terms, he demanded a dreadful tribute. Every 9 years, or in some versions every single year, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. These 14 youths were not sent as guests but as offerings. They were thrown into the labyrinth, left to wander hopelessly until they encountered the Minotaur and were devoured. This cycle of fear and sacrifice continued, a shadow over an entire city. The story turns when the Athenian prince Theseus, son of King Aegeus, volunteered to be part of the third tribute. He sailed to Crete with the doomed youths, determined to end the horror. Upon arrival, Princess Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, saw Theseus and fell in love with him. She could not bear the thought of him dying in the maze, so she went to the builder of the labyrinth himself, Daedalus, and asked for a way to defeat it. He gave her a simple but brilliant solution, a ball of thread. That night, Ariadne secretly met Theseus and gave him the thread and a sword. Her instructions were clear. Tie one end to the entrance, let the ball unwind as you go deeper, and after you slay the beast, follow the thread back to the light. Theseus entered the terrible maze, found the sleeping Minotaur in its lair, and after a fierce struggle, killed the monster with his sword. True to the plan, he followed the glimmering thread back through the twisting darkness, leading the other Athenian youths to safety. They fled Crete with Ariadne, breaking the curse and ending the bloody tribute forever. It is a perfect tale of heroic triumph, a satisfying victory of cleverness over brute strength, of order over chaos. We hear it and feel the relief of the monster slain, the maze conquered. But what if this polished, heroic version is just the surface? What if, beneath the layers of a good bedtime story, the bones of something much older and stranger are waiting to be found? That heroic ending feels almost too perfect, a neat bow tied on a story of terror. Yet for centuries, scholars have looked at such myths and sensed something else lurking beneath the polished surface. They follow a principle called euhemerism, a simple but powerful idea. It suggests that our most enduring legends are not pure inventions, but rather exaggerated, fantastical echoes of real events, real people, and real cultures from a forgotten past. The gods might be deified kings. The monsters could be distorted memories of foreign enemies or misunderstood rituals. The magical places might be descriptions of actual, awe-inspiring locations that later generations could no longer fully comprehend. So we have to ask, if the Minotaur story is one of these echoes, what is the original sound? What real world could possibly produce a legend of a bull-headed man, a complex labyrinth, and a powerful sea king who demands tribute? To find out, we must travel back over 3,000 years to the glittering Bronze Age Mediterranean and meet a civilization so advanced, so mysterious that its true name was lost to history. We know them today only by the name of their legendary king, Minos. They are the Minoans. For over 3,000 years, the Minoans existed only as a phantom in a story. Then, at the very beginning of the 20th century, a man with a shovel and a powerful imagination changed everything. His name was Sir Arthur Evans, a wealthy British archaeologist obsessed with finding the truth behind the Greek myths. He had heard local rumors on Crete of ancient stones and strange symbols, tales that pointed to a place called Knossos. In the year 1900, he began to dig, and what he uncovered was beyond anyone's wildest dreams. He did not find a simple ruin. He unearthed an entire lost civilization buried beneath the olive groves. The scale was staggering, a vast palace complex sprawling over acres with over 1,000 rooms connected by a bewildering network of corridors, staircases, and courtyards. It was not a fortified castle, but an open, airy center of administration and culture, built with a sophistication that seemed to defy its age. The walls, once bare earth, were suddenly alive with color. Evans and his team found breathtaking frescoes preserved in fragments, which they painstakingly restored. These paintings showed a vibrant, peaceful society, captivated by nature and ritual. Young men and women leaped gracefully over the backs of bulls in a dangerous acrobatic sport. Processions of offering bearers carried gifts. Dolphins swam across plaster walls, and elegant ladies with elaborate hairstyles and flounced dresses gazed out with serene, almost modern expressions. But the marvels were not just artistic. The palace had an advanced, centralized drainage system with terracotta pipes and even flush toilets, a level of comfort and engineering thought impossible for such an ancient time. Standing in the midst of this breathtaking discovery, Evans made a decisive and poetic leap. He looked at the maze-like layout of the palace, its countless twisting corridors and sudden dead ends. He remembered the legendary King Minos from the stories, and he gave this magnificent, rediscovered people the name we still use today. He called them the Minoans. In that single act, archaeology and myth were forever fused. Evans did not just discover a palace, he provided a potential real-world setting for the legend. Could this sprawling complex at Knossos be the historical labyrinth? Were those bull-leaping frescoes a clue to the origin of the Minotaur itself? The myth now had a physical home, and the search for the monster within its walls took on a thrilling new dimension. Walking through the excavated halls of Knossos today, the sense of disorientation is immediate and profound. This was not a simple, rectangular fortress. The palace is a sprawling, multi-level architectural puzzle, a honeycomb of over 1,000 interlocking rooms. Corridors twist and turn without obvious pattern, leading you into a bright courtyard only to funnel you back into a dim, narrow passageway. Staircases appear suddenly, leading to upper floors that are long gone, leaving you to wonder where they once went. You can round a corner and find yourself facing a blank wall, a dead end that forces you to retrace your steps through a network of identical-looking halls. Light wells and air shafts create pockets of sun and shadow, making the layout even harder to grasp. For a visitor familiar with the later, more orderly grid-like plans of classical Greek cities, this complex would have felt utterly bewildering, a deliberate construction of confusion. Now, let us shift perspective to a few centuries after the palace's collapse. Imagine you are a Greek sailor from the mainland, perhaps an early Mycenaean or even an Athenian, hearing tales of a once mighty sea king on Crete. You come ashore and find these colossal ruins not as a restored museum but as a broken, overgrown skeleton of a building. You wander through its roofless, debris-filled corridors, trying to make sense of the endless turns and identical-looking plaster walls. The sheer scale and complexity would be overwhelming. Without a guide, without a map, you would be genuinely, frighteningly lost. It requires no great leap of imagination to see how, over generations of storytelling, this real experience of being trapped in a vast, man-made maze evolved into the myth of an impenetrable labyrinth built to cage a monster. The story gave a supernatural reason for a very real, visceral feeling of confusion and dread experienced in a ruined place. Even the name itself may hold a direct clue. In the ruins of Knossos, archaeologists found a recurring sacred symbol carved into the stone pillars and frescoes, the double-bladed axe. In the ancient Lydian language, a word for this double axe was Labrys. Could it be that the palace of Knossos, adorned with these sacred Labrys symbols, was known to later Greeks as the place of the double axe? And could that term, Labrys, have slowly transformed through storytelling into the word we know today, labyrinth? It is a compelling connection, suggesting the monster's prison was not a fantasy, but a memory of a real, awe-inspiring, and deeply confusing sacred palace. The walls of Knossos tell their own stories, and one scene repeats like a sacred chant. Among the most breathtaking discoveries was the bull-leaping fresco, a masterpiece of motion frozen in time. Picture a powerful, charging bull, its muscles taut, captured mid-gallop. Around this immense animal, three human figures move with impossible grace. One acrobat grasps the bull's horns, using the beast's own toss of its head to launch into a somersault over its back. A second figure is upside down in midair, arched perfectly over the bull's spine. A third stands behind, arms outstretched, ready to catch the leaper or perhaps begin his own approach. The scene is not one of combat or fear, but of coordinated, breathtaking athleticism. It radiates a sense of ritualized danger, a sacred dance with a powerful animal. This was not a one-time event. Variations of this bull-leaping scene appear on Minoan seals, pottery, and in other frescoes. It was clearly a central, recurring practice in their culture, a fusion of sport, performance, and likely deep religious significance. The bull was not a monster to them. It was a potent symbol of strength, fertility, and perhaps the divine itself. Interacting with it in this lethal ballet may have been a rite of passage, a way for young men and women to demonstrate courage, skill, and favor with the gods. Now, let us fast forward several hundred years. The gleaming palace of Knossos is a crumbling, abandoned ruin. The sophisticated Minoan civilization has faded into a half-remembered dream. New people, the Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland, now dominate the region. They hear fragmented tales of the old lords of Crete, stories passed down and inevitably changed. They see the faded, puzzling frescoes on the broken walls, showing humans vaulting over bulls. They hear echoes of a culture where the bull was sacred, where priests or kings may have worn ceremonial bull masks during certain rituals, a common practice in many ancient religions to channel an animal's power. To these newcomers, the idea of a man wearing a bull's head would be strange, perhaps frightening. The concept of a ritual where humans engaged so intimately with such a dangerous animal could easily be misunderstood. Over generations of retelling, the line between man and sacred beast begins to blur in the storytelling. What was once a depiction of a daring acrobat beside a bull slowly morphs in the collective memory. The man and the bull, once two separate beings in a ritual, fuse into a single, terrifying creature. The memory of a sacred animal at the heart of a lost culture twists into the legend of a monstrous hybrid, a bull man born from a divine curse. The graceful leaper frozen on the palace wall did not become the Minotaur, but the distorted memory of his ritual may have given the monster its unforgettable form. So we have a plausible real maze and a plausible origin for the bull man, but a story needs a villain, a reason for the terror. Why would a civilization be remembered as a tyrant demanding human sacrifice? Among the ruins of Knossos and other Minoan sites, one architectural motif rises again and again, silent yet shouting its importance. These are the horns of consecration, massive stone carvings of upward curving bull horns, often placed atop altars, framing palace entrances or crowning the highest walls. They were not mere decoration. These horns were a powerful religious symbol, a permanent invocation of the bull's divine essence and strength, marking a space as sacred as connected to a higher power. Imagine walking through the palace complex, seeing these imposing horns silhouetted against the sky at every major turn. They were a constant visual reminder of what this society held in ultimate reverence. The bull was not just an animal they leapt over, it was a spiritual force they literally built their world around. Its power was consecrated into the very stones of their civilization. Now view this through the lens of a conquering or succeeding culture like the Mycenaean Greeks. They inherit the land, but the meaning behind these towering horned symbols is lost to them. All they see is a society utterly obsessed with the bull. Everywhere they look, on every altar and gateway, the symbol of the beast glares back at them. To an outsider trying to make sense of a fallen, grander world, a metaphorical leap could easily occur. If a people are defined by what they worship, then perhaps these bull worshippers were not just led by a king named Minos, but were symbolically ruled by the bull itself. The abstract symbol of sacred power could, over centuries of campfire tales and political propaganda, crystallize into a literal ruler. The horns of consecration, meant to channel divine energy, might have slowly transformed in story into the horns on a monster's head. A culture that revered the bull's power could be recast by its enemies and successors as a culture that was monstrously hybridized with it. The symbol planted the seed, and the dark soil of fear and misunderstanding allowed the legend of the Minotaur to grow. But the creature in the maze had another name, a name that casts a different, more celestial light on its origins. In some of the oldest versions of the myth, the Minotaur was not simply called the Bull of Minos. He was given a personal name, Asterion, which translates to the starry one or ruler of the stars. This is not a name for a mindless beast. It is a title of cosmic significance, hinting at a connection to the heavens that was utterly stripped away in the later, more monstrous telling. So why would a flesh-eating monster be named for the stars? To find an answer, we must look up past the dark corridors of the labyrinth to the night sky as the Minoans would have seen it. The bull was not just a powerful animal on earth for them, it was a constellation in the heavens. Taurus, the bull, is one of the oldest and most prominent constellations, and its rising in the spring was critically important to ancient agricultural societies, marking the time for planting and renewal. For a seafaring and farming culture like the Minoans, tracking this celestial bull would have been a matter of survival and sacred duty. It is deeply plausible that they not only observed Taurus but venerated it, weaving it into their cosmology and kingship rituals. A king who derived his power from the gods and the natural cycles might have taken on the mantle of the starry bull as a symbol of his divine, earthly authority. He could have been Asterion, the earthly embodiment or high priest of the celestial bull, ensuring the seasons turned and the crops grew. Now, let us follow the thread of misunderstanding once more. Centuries pass, the Minoan kingdom and its sophisticated star lore fade. Newcomers arrive and hear fragments of this old tradition. They hear tales of a powerful ruler of Crete associated with the bull, a starry one. But the original religious and astronomical context is lost. All that remains is the unsettling core idea, a being that is both man and bull linked to a labyrinthine palace. The majestic, star-crowned title Asterion slowly sheds its heavenly meaning. It becomes merely the name of a hybrid creature, and then, as the story darkens further, the name is forgotten altogether, replaced by the blunt, terrifying label Minotaur, the bull of Minos. The deified king or priest becomes a demon, his cosmic connection reduced to a dark prison under the earth. This transformation from a starry ruler to a subterranean monster is one of the most poignant twists in the entire legend. It shows how a complete cultural framework can collapse, leaving only its most startling pieces to be reassembled by others into a shape of nightmare. A hero's victory can be the echo of an empire's rise. To understand the full meaning of the Minotaur's defeat, we must look closely at the slayer himself, Prince Theseus. In the world of Greek myth, Theseus is not just any hero, he is the legendary founder king of Athens, the figure who unified its scattered villages into a powerful city-state. He represents the very essence of Athenian and, by extension, Mycenaean Greek identity, order, and ambition. His story is one of civilization triumphing over chaos. So when this archetypal hero sails from Athens to Crete to face the bull monster, the story operates on two levels. On the surface, it is a personal quest for glory and liberation. But on a deeper, almost geopolitical level, it reads like a symbolic conquest. The myth perfectly mirrors a seismic shift in the ancient world, the decline of Minoan sea power and the ascendancy of the Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland. For centuries, Minoan Crete was the dominant cultural and economic force in the Aegean, its influence radiating out from palaces like Knossos. Their art, their architecture, their advanced society set the standard. Then, around the middle of the second millennium BCE, the balance of power began to change. Archaeological evidence shows Mycenaean presence and influence growing on Crete. There is even a layer of destruction at Knossos around 1400 BCE that many scholars attribute to Mycenaean invaders or a takeover from within. This was not a simple, overnight collapse, but a gradual cultural and political absorption. The sophisticated, bull-venerating Minoan world was slowly overtaken by the more warlike, palace-centered culture of the Mycenaeans. Now consider how a civilization processes such a monumental, complex transition across generations. The messy realities of trade disputes, shifting alliances, and gradual cultural assimilation are hard to remember and harder to mythologize. But a story, a powerful story, can encapsulate that entire historical shift into a single, unforgettable image. A heroic prince from the rising power, Athens, journeys to the heart of the old empire, Crete. He enters its greatest symbol of power and mystery, the labyrinthine palace. There, he confronts and destroys the ultimate symbol of that old culture's strange, terrifying essence, the bull-man. He then escapes with the king's daughter, Ariadne, literally taking a piece of the old world's legacy with him. This is not just a monster hunt, it is a narrative of cultural takeover. The myth simplifies centuries of intricate history into a clear, satisfying parable. The new order defeating the old mystery, Greek heroism overcoming the alien and the monstrous. The tribute of Athenian youth sent to be devoured could even symbolize the very real economic and political burdens Crete once imposed on its neighbors. A bitter memory transformed into a tale of literal consumption. In the end, Theseus does not just kill a monster, he slays the haunting memory of a time when his people were not in charge. The story assures its listeners that their world, the Mycenaean Greek world, is the rightful heroic successor. The tribute of 14 young Athenians is the story's darkest, most chilling detail. Why would a proud city surrender its children to a monster every 9 years? This element feels less like fantasy and more like a haunting memory of a very real political relationship, one of subjugation and heavy cost. At the height of its power, the Minoan civilization was a thalassocracy, a sophisticated sea empire. Its powerful fleet controlled trade routes across the eastern Mediterranean, and its cultural influence was immense. Smaller, less developed mainland communities, including early Athens, would have existed in the shadow of this maritime superpower. Such a relationship often came with a price. Vassal states or client communities typically paid tribute to their more powerful overlords, not in symbolic trinkets, but in valuable commodities that represented their wealth and labor, like grain, olive oil, precious metals, or crafted goods. This tribute was a constant drain, a yearly reminder of who held true power. Now translate that economic reality into the language of myth over centuries of retelling. The abstract, complex idea of a yearly shipment of valuable resources from Athens to Crete is difficult to personify. But a shipment of people, of a city's most vital resource, its youth, is horrifyingly concrete. The devouring of these young men and women by the Minotaur could be a powerful metaphor for how Minoan dominance consumed Athenian resources, stifling their growth and autonomy. Each tribute cycle in the myth mirrors the relentless, draining cycle of economic obligation. The monster in the maze becomes a personification of the distant, insatiable Cretan power that demanded so much. There is also a grimmer, though less certain, possibility. Some ancient societies did practice forms of ritual human sacrifice or the sending of hostages to secure treaties. While there is no direct archaeological evidence for this in Minoan Crete, the concept would not have been alien to the ancient Greek mind. The story could be preserving a blurred memory of a time when Athenian youths were sent to Crete not to die, but to serve, perhaps as hostages to ensure their city's compliance, or even as attendants in the Minoan palace or religious centers. To later generations, separated by time and cultural change, the fate of those young people sent away to a strange, bull-worshipping culture might have been unimaginable. Their assimilation or service could have been mythologized as a literal consumption by the beast that symbolized that foreign power. The myth transforms a historical relationship of political and economic dependence into a visceral, personal nightmare, giving a face, albeit a monstrous one, to the abstract fear of being dominated and drained by a superior, mysterious force. Every hero needs a guide, and every maze needs a builder. In the myth, that mastermind is Daedalus, the brilliant artisan condemned to serve King Minos. He is the architect of the Labyrinth and the creator of the wings that would later carry him to freedom. But Daedalus feels different from the other characters, less like a person and more like an embodiment of an idea. He is not defined by love or rage, but by pure, breathtaking ingenuity. This is our most compelling clue that Daedalus himself is a mythic memory, a personification of the staggering technological and artistic genius that defined the Minoan Golden Age. To later Greeks, the ruins of Knossos and the artifacts found within would have seemed impossible, the work of a magician or a god. They needed a name for that magic, and they called it Daedalus. His most famous commission was, of course, the Labyrinth. We have already seen how the sprawling, complex palace of Knossos could have inspired the legend of an inescapable maze. But Daedalus did not just design a confusing building, he engineered a prison so perfect it was a work of art in confinement. This mirrors the very real, sophisticated architecture of the Minoans, which was far more than just stacking stones. Their multi-story palaces employed advanced techniques like light wells for ventilation and illumination, elaborate drainage systems with terracotta pipes that managed water flow with precision, and the use of wooden beams within stone walls to make them flexible and earthquake-resistant. These were not crude forts, they were masterpieces of civil engineering that would have appeared miraculous to later peoples whose own building techniques were simpler. The mythical labyrinth, a structure of unparalleled complexity, is a storybook reflection of these very real, awe-inspiring architectural wonders. Beyond architecture, the legend credits Daedalus with creating animated statues and intricate metalwork so lifelike it seemed supernatural. Greek writers described his statues as needing to be chained down lest they walk away. This fantastical notion finds a startling echo in the actual artifacts of Minoan Crete. Archaeologists have uncovered exquisite works in gold, such as the delicate bee pendant from Mallia, with its granulated details so fine they defy belief for the era. They found intricately carved seal stones, tiny gems used for stamping, depicting elaborate scenes with a precision that required magnifying lenses we have yet to discover. The famous bull's head rhyton, a ceremonial vessel carved from black steatite with eyes of crystal and jasper, is so vibrantly lifelike it feels like it could snort. To a Mycenaean or later Greek seeing such objects for the first time, unearthed from ancient tombs or found in ruins, the craftsmanship would have seemed beyond human skill. The only logical explanation in the language of myth was that a superhuman artificer, Daedalus, must have made them. Finally, there are the wings. The story of Daedalus and his son Icarus fashioning wings from feathers and wax is a timeless parable about ambition. But it too may be rooted in a maritime reality. The Minoans were the supreme seafarers of their age. Their sleek, graceful ships, painted on frescoes at Knossos, connected their island empire to Egypt, the Near East, and the Greek mainland. They mastered the winds and currents of the Mediterranean, a form of freedom and power that must have felt like soaring compared to land-bound societies. The concept of crafting a device to conquer a realm, to literally take to the air, could be a poetic metaphor for the Minoan mastery of the sea, that other vast fluid expanse. Daedalus, the inventor of wings, becomes the symbol of the civilization that built the ships that ruled the waves. So Daedalus is likely not one man, but many. He is the collective spirit of the unnamed Minoan engineers, metalworkers, fresco painters, and shipwrights whose innovations were so advanced they left their successors in wonder. When the Mycenaean Greeks inherited this legacy, they could not comprehend the centuries of accumulated skill it represented. They condensed it into the figure of a single, tragic genius, a fitting tribute to a civilization whose true scale of achievement was itself lost in the labyrinth of time. This brilliant artificer, then, is the final piece that makes the monster's world complete, a world of such sophistication that its collapse could only be explained by a hero's sword and a fall from a great height. Scattered throughout the ruins of Minoan Crete, carved into stone pillars and painted on palace walls, one symbol appears with a frequency that demands our attention. It is the Labrys, the double-bladed axe. This is not the crude, single-headed tool of a woodsman. Its symmetrical blades curve gracefully outward from a central haft, creating a shape that is both weapon and sacred icon. Made from gleaming bronze or even gold for ceremonial purposes, the Labrys was far more than a utilitarian object. Its image was everywhere, marking altars, framing doorways, and held aloft by goddesses in religious frescoes. Archaeologists believe it was a central symbol of Minoan power and divinity, likely used in rituals that sanctified spaces and perhaps in the sacrifice of bulls. The act of wielding the double axe would have been a profound religious gesture, a direct connection to a divine force. Now, listen closely to that word, Labrys. Say it aloud, Labrys. Now say the word that has haunted our story from the beginning, Labyrinth. The linguistic echo is unmistakable and profoundly significant. To the ancient Greeks who later inherited the legends of Crete, the labyrinth was the maze, but to the Minoans who built the great palace, the term likely had a very different meaning. If the Labrys was their paramount sacred symbol, then a place adorned with it, a place consecrated by its presence, could logically be called the place of the double axe. Over centuries, as the Minoan language faded and Greek took its place, that original term, the House of the Labrys, could have slowly morphed in pronunciation and meaning. It shifted from describing a specific, holy site to defining an abstract concept of bewildering complexity. The word traveled a path from the concrete to the cryptic, from a real temple to a mythical prison. This single linguistic clue transforms our understanding of the entire legend. It suggests the labyrinth was never conceived as a dungeon for a monster. Instead, it was a memory distorted by time of the most sacred precincts within the Minoan palace complexes like Knossos. Those twisting corridors we walked through earlier were not designed for confusion but for ritual procession. The dead ends may have been private chapels or storerooms for sacred objects. The entire complex was a sanctuary, a house of the double axe, where priests and priestesses performed ceremonies to channel the power of the divine, a power intimately linked to the bull. So the Minotaur was not imprisoned in a maze, but rather the memory of the bull god was preserved within a sanctuary. The monster in the dark is a ghost of a forgotten religion, its sacred symbol now remembered only as the name for its imagined cage. A simple ball of thread is the key to the entire myth. Without it, the hero is just another victim lost in the dark. But in a story filled with symbolic monsters and mazes, could this thread itself be a metaphor, a cleverly disguised piece of secret knowledge that changed history? Ariadne was not just a lovesick princess, she was the daughter of King Minos, raised within the very heart of the labyrinth itself. She had access. She understood the rhythms and secrets of the palace in a way no outsider ever could. What if her thread represents something far more valuable than string? Something like the guarded, insider knowledge of the palace layout held only by the Minoan royal family or their priesthood. To an elite initiate, the palace was not a maze, it was a sacred map. They would know which corridors led to the central sanctuaries, which staircases were functional, and which passages were ritual dead ends. This knowledge was power, the power to navigate the most important building in the world. For Theseus, an invading prince, this was the ultimate intelligence. He did not need to memorize a path, he just needed a guide who knew the way. Ariadne's betrayal, then, becomes a devastating act of espionage. By giving Theseus this thread of insider knowledge, she handed over the literal blueprint to the Minoan seat of power. He did not outsmart the maze, he was given its cheat code by a traitor within the walls. This transforms the myth from a fairy tale test into a plausible story of a palace coup, where the greatest vulnerability was not a monster, but a disaffected heir with crucial information. But the metaphor could stretch even further beyond the stone corridors and out to the open sea. The Minoans were masters of the Mediterranean, and their sea power was built on a closely guarded asset, their knowledge of navigation. They knew the secret sailing routes, the safe harbors, the seasonal currents, and the stars to follow. This maritime thread was what held their empire together, allowing their ships to move with confidence and control the trade that made them rich. For a rising rival like the Mycenaean Greeks, challenging that thalassocracy was impossible without stealing that navigational knowledge. So consider Ariadne again, not just as a princess of a palace, but as a princess of a sea kingdom. Her thread could symbolize these precious sailing routes or navigational secrets. By fleeing with Theseus, she was not just helping a handsome stranger escape a maze, she was literally showing him the way home, providing the Mycenaeans with the maritime intelligence they needed to bypass Minoan naval dominance and sail safely back to Athens. Her betrayal, then, is monumental, the passing of a state secret that could unravel an empire. In this light, the entire mythic journey becomes an allegory for the transfer of technological and strategic supremacy. Theseus does not merely kill a monster, he severs the thread of Minoan control, first by penetrating their greatest sanctuary with insider help, and then by mastering the sea lanes to escape. Ariadne's gift is the catalyst that allows the new power to navigate the old world, both its physical labyrinth and its vast blue water domain. The love story fades, and what remains is a chillingly pragmatic tale of how civilizations truly fall, not just by force, but by the betrayal of the secrets that made them great. All of our theories and connections rest on interpreting silent stones and faded paintings, but the Minoans themselves were not silent. They wrote extensively. On clay tablets, on stone libation tables, and on beautiful ceilings, they left behind their records. This script, known today as Linear A, is a ghost in the archive. We can see its elegant, flowing symbols, a combination of abstract signs and recognizable objects like ships, weapons, and plants. We have over 1,400 examples of it. But we cannot read a single word. Linear A remains one of the most significant and frustrating undeciphered scripts in the world. This means that for all our architectural marvels and artistic wonders, we are deaf to the true voice of this civilization. We have their palace, but we cannot hear the king's decrees. We have their storerooms, but we cannot read the inventory. We have what appear to be religious inscriptions, but we cannot understand their prayers or the names of their gods. This profound silence creates a vacuum, an empty space where history should be, and nature, along with human imagination, abhors a vacuum. Into that void where the authentic Minoan narrative should reside, rushed the stories of others. The later Greeks, the Mycenaeans who inherited the land, looked upon these colossal ruins and strange, unreadable tablets. They had no official records to consult, no chronicles to explain who built these wonders or why they fell. All they had were fragments, physical and remembered. So they did what humans have always done. They wove a story to explain the unexplainable. The unreadable script, the labyrinthine palace, the omnipresent bull symbols, all of these disconnected, awe-inspiring clues needed a narrative to bind them. The myth of the Minotaur provided that narrative perfectly. It offered a dramatic, emotionally satisfying reason for such a strange and powerful culture to exist and then to end. A monstrous birth explained the cultural obsession with the bull. An impenetrable maze explained the confusing palace ruins. A cruel tribute demand explained their historical dominance over the sea. And a heroic slaying explained their ultimate downfall. The myth filled the silence left by Linear A with noise, with drama, with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Every time we look at those undeciphered clay tablets, we are reminded that the Minotaur is, in a sense, a placeholder. It is the dramatic character we created to stand in for a real people whose own story is locked away in symbols we cannot yet comprehend. The monster guards the final door to the truth, and the key to that door is not a sword but a cipher. Until we crack the code of Linear A, the Minoans will speak to us only through the distorted echo of a legend, and the bull man will keep his secrets in the dark. But sometimes the real monster is not a beast with horns, but the earth itself. There is another cataclysm written not in myth, but in the geological record, an event so vast it may have reshaped the entire Mediterranean world and echoed for centuries in its stories. Around the year 1600 BCE, a catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale occurred just 70 miles north of Crete. The island of Thera, known today as Santorini, was not the picturesque tourist destination we see now. It was a thriving Minoan outpost, a smaller sister to the Grand Palace culture. Then the volcano at its heart awoke. This was not a simple eruption. It was one of the most powerful volcanic events in human history, a cataclysm that makes even the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius look modest by comparison. The entire center of the island exploded, collapsing into the sea and creating the massive, water-filled caldera we see today. The immediate effects were apocalyptic. First came earthquakes, violent tremors that would have shaken Crete, toppling buildings and cracking palace walls. Then, the mountain itself blew apart, sending a column of ash and pumice over 20 miles high into the stratosphere. This plume would have blackened the sky for days, turning noon into midnight across the eastern Mediterranean. But the true horror for coastal Crete arrived from the sea. The sudden collapse of the volcano into the ocean triggered a titanic tsunami, a wall of water perhaps hundreds of feet high that radiated outward at incredible speed. Within an hour, this monstrous wave would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete, scouring away entire coastal towns, harbors, and farmlands. It would have swept up river valleys, drowning the interior and utterly destroying the Minoan fleet, the very source of their wealth and power as it lay at anchor. Following the wave came a rain of volcanic ash, burying fields and choking life, leading to years of failed harvests and famine. In a single day, the Minoan world was dealt a blow from which it could never fully recover. Their society was left crippled, vulnerable, and shrouded in a literal and figurative darkness. Now, stand on the shore of Santorini today and look at its distinctive shape. The island forms a broken ring, a crescent moon of cliffs surrounding a deep blue central sea. That crescent shape is unmistakable. It is the form of a giant bull's horn. The very island that unleashed this earth-shattering violence was, and is, shaped like the most sacred symbol of Minoan culture. To the survivors on Crete, watching their world drown and burn under a darkened sky, how would they have processed such an event? Their entire cosmology was built around the power of the bull, a symbol of fertile strength. Now, the bullhorn island in the sea had roared with a fury that destroyed their ports, their ships, and their way of life. It would have felt like a divine punishment, the wrath of the bull god made terrifyingly real. The roaring of the volcano, the tremors shaking the ground, the tsunami crashing ashore, these could easily have been woven into legend as the bellowing of an enraged subterranean beast. The ash that blotted out the sun was the breath of the monster. The labyrinth of their own damaged, debris-filled palace corridors, now truly a death trap, became the creature's lair. Over generations, the memory of a geological disaster and the symbol of the culture it devastated fused. The incomprehensible natural event became personified. The earth-shattering power from the horn-shaped island was slowly sculpted by time and trauma into the form of the horned monster in the maze. The Minotaur may not have been born from a queen's curse, but from a mountain's rage, a mythic explanation for a historical trauma too great for any civilization to forget. The reverence for the bull stretched far beyond the shores of Crete. This powerful animal was not a Minoan obsession alone, but a sacred symbol echoing across the entire Bronze Age world. In the sun-baked lands of Egypt, the bull was worshipped as the living embodiment of potent gods. The Apis bull, kept in a temple at Memphis, was considered a manifestation of the creator god Ptah. It was a living deity, adorned with gold and jewels, and its death prompted national mourning and a search for its reincarnated successor. To the north, in Anatolia, the storm god Teshub was often depicted standing upon a bull, his chariot pulled by the mighty beasts, symbolizing raw, untamed power over sky and earth. Even the distant Indus Valley civilization left behind seals depicting powerful, humped bulls, suggesting a similar cultural veneration. More strikingly, the motif of the bull leap itself appears elsewhere. A carved ivory box from ancient Syria, dated to around the same period as the height of Minoan power, shows a figure somersaulting over a bull in a pose strikingly similar to the fresco at Knossos. This is crucial evidence. It tells us the Minoans were not inventing a bizarre, isolated ritual. They were participating in a widespread, shared religious language of the ancient Near East and Eastern Mediterranean, where the bull represented divine strength, fertility, and royal authority. The act of leaping over it was likely a pan-regional rite of passage or a sacred performance, known from the palaces of Crete to the workshops of the Levant. So if bull veneration was so common, why did only the Minoans end up with a legend of a monstrous bull man? The answer lies not in the practice itself, but in the specific lens of memory. For the Egyptians, the bull god was integrated into a complex, continuous pantheon that survived for millennia. Their cultural narrative remained unbroken. For the Mycenaean Greeks, however, the Minoans were a magnificent, dominant, and then fallen predecessor. Their civilization was a mystery that needed explaining. When the Greeks later inherited the ruins and the stories, they saw the bull symbols without the original religious context. They fused the foreign practice with the awe-inspiring labyrinthine ruins and the historical reality of Cretan dominance. The bull, a universal symbol of sacred power, became uniquely twisted in the Greek imagination into the Minotaur, a monstrous symbol of a terrifying, surpassed past. The myth is less about a strange cult and more about how one culture defines itself by demonizing the sacred icons of the civilization it eclipsed. The roar of the volcano has faded, but the Minotaur's shadow stretches long into the modern world. This ancient creature refuses to stay buried in its Bronze Age labyrinth, continually clawing its way into our art, our stories, and our deepest fears. In the 20th century, the myth found a ferocious new life in the hands of Pablo Picasso. For years, the bull was a central, almost obsessive figure in his work, but it was his series of Minotaur etchings in the 1930s where the legend truly bled onto the page. Picasso's Minotaur is not a simple monster. It is a complex, tormented figure, often depicted in scenes of violent passion, blind rage, or profound melancholy. In one famous print, the blind Minotaur is led through the night by a young girl holding a dove, a haunting image of brute force guided by fragile innocence. Picasso channeled his own personal turmoil, the rising political violence in Europe, and a primal, chaotic energy into this hybrid form. He proved the Minotaur was not a relic, but a perfectly modern vessel for expressing the raw, untamed, and often contradictory forces within the human spirit. From there, the creature galloped into the heart of popular fantasy. In contemporary novels, the Minotaur is rarely just a foe to be slain. It becomes a tragic anti-hero in stories like Stephen Sherrill's The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break, living a quiet, lonely life in modern America, grappling with its own monstrousness. It appears as a formidable guardian in the labyrinths of Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, connecting young readers directly to the ancient myths. Each retelling reinvents the beast, asking new questions about isolation, identity, and what we label as monstrous. Yet perhaps the most profound modern labyrinth is not made of stone but of the mind. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung saw myths not as historical records, but as maps of the universal human psyche, what he called the collective unconscious. In his framework, the Minotaur takes on a terrifyingly personal meaning. It becomes the symbol of the shadow self, the hidden part of our personality that contains all the traits, desires, and impulses we deny or repress because they are unacceptable to our conscious identity. This shadow is not inherently evil, but it is wild, instinctual, and powerful. And where does this shadow beast reside? In the labyrinth, of course, but now the maze is our own unconscious mind, a twisting, confusing inner space we fear to enter. The heroic journey of Theseus then transforms into the difficult process of individuation, the quest to become a whole, integrated person. To do that, we must venture into our own inner labyrinth, confront the Minotaur of our repressed self, not to slay it, but to understand it, to acknowledge its power and bring it into the light of consciousness. This psychological interpretation explains why the myth still chills us. It is no longer about a king's curse on an island. It is about the monster we each fear lives within us, the chaotic, animalistic parts we try to wall away in the dark corridors of our own being. The story endures because it gives shape to a universal human anxiety, that we are not the masters of our own inner world, that something ancient and hungry waits in the dark, just around the next turn of our own thoughts. The ruins of Knossos we walk through today are not entirely ancient. They are a conversation between past and present, and that conversation has sparked one of archaeology's most enduring controversies. Sir Arthur Evans, the man who rediscovered the Minoans, faced a monumental dilemma. He had unearthed a palace of staggering complexity, but it was a shattered puzzle. Walls were collapsed, frescoes were in countless fragments, and upper stories had vanished. Evans made a radical decision for his time. He would not just excavate, he would restore. Using reinforced concrete, his team rebuilt columns, reconstructed staircases, and recreated entire rooms. They took the thousands of painted plaster fragments found on the floors and, like the world's most ambitious jigsaw, pieced them together on new walls, often filling in missing details with their own educated guesses. The result is breathtaking and immediate. Visitors today can stand in the throne room, walk through the grand staircases, and see the famous frescoes like the Bull Leaper and the Prince of the Lilies in vivid color, seemingly in their original positions. Evans gave the world a tangible, walkable Minoan palace, but he also built what some critics call a modern labyrinth, a maze of interpretation cast in concrete. The controversy is not about his intent, which was to preserve and illuminate, but about the consequences. By making Knossos so complete, so visually coherent, did Evans accidentally freeze our understanding? His reconstructions are based on the best knowledge of the early 1900s, but archaeology has evolved dramatically since then. New research might suggest a room had a different function, a fresco was placed elsewhere, or a column was painted another color. Yet the powerful physical reality of Evans's Knossos is hard to shake. It sets a definitive image in the mind, one that can be difficult for newer, more nuanced theories to compete with. Furthermore, his bold, sometimes speculative repainting of the frescoes has been questioned. The vibrant colors and complete scenes we see are partly his artist's interpretations. We must ask, when we look at the Prince of the Lilies, are we seeing a Minoan prince, or are we seeing an early 20th century British vision of what a Minoan prince should look like? This adds a profound meta layer of mystery to our entire quest. We began by trying to separate the myth from the history at Knossos. Now we find that the very history we are examining has been partially shaped by a modern storyteller with a trowel and a bucket of concrete. The site is a palimpsest, a document written over time. The Minoans built the first layer. An earthquake or invasion may have written the next, then centuries of soil and silence. Then Evans with his grand reconstruction, and now every new archaeologist with a revised theory adds another line. This means that searching for the real Minotaur is not just about digging through ancient dirt. It is about carefully peeling back the layers of modern imagination that have been lovingly but firmly plastered over the past. The labyrinth is not only under our feet, it is in the very way we choose to remember. The search for the Minotaur has inspired some wonderfully creative, if not entirely credible, explanations. One popular fringe theory suggests the monster was simply a masked performer, a bull dancer whose elaborate costume was misunderstood by outsiders. In this view, a man wearing a ceremonial bull headdress for a sacred rite, perhaps seen from a distance or described secondhand, became the seed for the hybrid creature. It is a tidy, almost logical idea, reducing the supernatural to a case of mistaken identity at a cultural festival. Another idea points to the helmets of the time. Mycenaean Greek warriors later wore boar-tusk helmets that gave them a fearsome, bestial appearance. Could the Minotaur be a distorted memory of a particularly brutal Minoan or early Mycenaean king who wore a helmet adorned with bull horns, his reign so cruel he was remembered not as a man but as the beast he embodied? Then there are the more speculative leaps. Some have looked to the fossil record, wondering if ancient Greeks unearthed the enormous skull of a prehistoric animal, like an aurochs or a mammoth, with its massive horned skull mistaken for that of a giant human-bull hybrid. The discovery of such bones could have fueled legends of a primeval race of monsters. Others, diving into more controversial waters, have proposed the Minotaur as a symbol of an astrological age or even an allegory for solar eclipses, where the sun is devoured by a celestial bull. While these theories stretch the evidence thin, they reveal something fundamental about us. Faced with a gap in history, the human mind abhors a vacuum. We would rather fill the silence with a masked dancer, a fossil, or a king in a scary helmet than with nothing at all. Each attempt, no matter how outlandish, is a testament to the story's enduring grip on our imagination. It is as if we are still trying to find the thread that will lead us out of the narrative maze, grabbing at any plausible strand we can find. The labyrinth is more than a monster's cage. It is a mirror reflecting our deepest fears about being lost. In the myth, it is a brutal prison of endless confusion, a perfect trap for the innocent and a fortress for the beast. Yet this terrifying image is only one side of an ancient symbol. Across the world and throughout history, labyrinths have served a very different, peaceful purpose. Look at the famous stone labyrinths carved into the shores of Scandinavia, or the intricate patterns laid into the floors of medieval cathedrals like Chartres. These are not mazes, they are unicursal paths, a single, winding line that leads inexorably to a center and back out again. There is no choice, no dead end, no trick. The purpose is not to confuse, but to guide. Walking these paths was a form of meditation, a physical prayer. The pilgrim would follow the serpentine route, letting the rhythmic turns quiet the mind, symbolizing a journey to one's own spiritual center and a return to the world transformed. This is the labyrinth as a tool for enlightenment, not entrapment. So we have two utterly opposing ideas, the multicursal maze of fear and the unicursal labyrinth of peace. The genius of the Minotaur myth is that it masterfully combines both. For the 14 Athenian youths, the Cretan labyrinth is absolutely a maze, a multicursal nightmare of branching choices and dead ends designed for their despair and consumption. They are the uninitiated, thrown into the dark without a map. Their experience is one of pure terror and helplessness, but for Theseus with Ariadne's thread, it becomes a unicursal path. He has a guide. The confusing branches collapse into a single, navigable route in and a guaranteed route out. He is the initiate, the one who has received the secret knowledge. The mythic labyrinth therefore functions dually, its nature changing based on who walks its halls. This duality speaks to a profound human truth about knowledge and power. Any complex system, be it a royal palace, a sacred ritual, or even a vast bureaucracy, can feel like an impenetrable maze to an outsider. It is bewildering, hostile, designed to exclude. But to an insider, someone with the right key, the same system is a straightforward path to a desired goal. The palace at Knossos likely felt this way to foreign envoys, a bewildering display of Minoan power and mystery. But to the priests and court officials, it was simply home, a functional, navigable seat of administration. The legend captures this perfectly, turning a cultural and architectural reality into a potent metaphor for the divide between the powerful and the powerless, the knowing and the lost. In the end, the labyrinth is not just a place in a story. It is the shape of any great challenge that seems impossible until you find the thread, the key piece of understanding that transforms an inscrutable maze into a path you can walk. The possibility of human sacrifice is the darkest shadow we can cast across the sunlit frescoes of Minoan Crete. It forces us to ask if the Minotaur's feast was a pure invention or a monstrous echo of something that truly happened. The archaeological record here is fragmentary, deeply unsettling, and fiercely debated. At the Palace of Knossos itself, in an area known as the North House, excavators found a set of rooms containing what appeared to be ritual deposits. Among them were the bones of children, and the analysis showed cut marks consistent with the careful removal of flesh with a sharp blade, a practice that could point to ritual defleshing after death. While this alone is not proof of sacrifice, it opens a door to a grimmer interpretation of Minoan religion, but the most chilling sight is not at Knossos. It lies on the slopes of Mount Juctas at a small temple complex called Anemospilia, which translates to the Caves of the Wind. Here, in the late 1970s, archaeologists made a discovery that sent a shockwave through the field. They uncovered the skeletons of 4 individuals in a building that had been destroyed in a violent earthquake. 3 of them were found in what seemed like ritual positions. One was a young man, about 18 years old, lying on a central platform. His bones showed that his ankles had been bound, and a massive bronze blade lay across his body. The position and the weapon suggested he had been restrained at the moment of his death. Nearby were the bodies of two others, perhaps priests caught in the act of a ceremony. The fourth skeleton was found near the entrance, possibly a person trying to flee. The excavators proposed a harrowing scenario. They believed the young man was being prepared as a human sacrifice, likely in a desperate attempt to appease the gods and stop the earthquake that was already shaking the ground. In this theory, the ceremony was interrupted catastrophically when the temple itself collapsed, burying and preserving the grim tableau forever. Now, this interpretation is not universally accepted. Other scholars argue the evidence is ambiguous, that the blade could have fallen from a shelf during the quake, and the binding could be explained differently. Yet the image is hauntingly potent. It suggests that in times of extreme crisis, such as the earth-shattering eruption of Thera, the Minoans might have turned to the most extreme form of supplication imaginable. If that is true, then the myth transforms yet again. The Minotaur's demand for Athenian youths is no longer just a metaphor for political tribute. It becomes a distorted, amplified memory of a real and terrifying religious practice. The monster in the labyrinth becomes the personification of a deity or a ritual so dark that later generations could only comprehend it as a beast that fed on human flesh. The 7 young men and 7 young women sent from Athens could symbolize the selection of victims, perhaps from subjugated populations, in a ritual to ensure the fertility of the land or the stability of the world after a disaster. This connection turns the legend inside out. The heroic slaying of the Minotaur by Theseus would then represent not just a military victory, but a cultural and religious revolution, the rejection of a practice that came to be seen as barbaric and monstrous by the succeeding Greek worldview. Whether the archaeological evidence definitively proves human sacrifice or not, its very existence provides a fertile, frightening soil from which such a story could naturally grow. The myth gives a face and a lair to a practice too terrible to remember plainly, locking it away in a maze of symbolism where only a hero with a thread could ever hope to end it. The Minotaur has escaped its ancient prison to roam the modern imagination, appearing everywhere from Saturday morning cartoons to blockbuster films. Our journey with this creature did not end in the ruins of Knossos, it simply changed channels. One of its earliest and most memorable cinematic appearances came in the 1958 fantasy classic, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Here, the Minotaur is a stop-motion marvel brought to life by the legendary Ray Harryhausen. It is a straightforward monster, a fearsome guardian in a labyrinth that Sinbad must defeat, but its animated, breathing presence gave the myth a terrifying physicality for a whole new generation. This set a template, casting the creature as the ultimate dungeon boss, a final test of heroism in a confusing maze. Video games have enthusiastically adopted this role. From the early dungeon crawlers of the 1980s to titles like God of War and Hades, the Minotaur is a recurring, formidable enemy. In these digital labyrinths, players literally become Theseus, learning the patterns of the beast's charge, dodging its horns, and striking with their virtual sword. The myth provides a perfect, pre-packaged dramatic structure for interactive entertainment, a built-in climax of skill and strategy. Yet modern storytellers often dig deeper than the simple boss fight. They explore the pathos Picasso tapped into, the monster's inner world. The Doctor Who episode The God Complex presents a brilliant, chilling twist. The monster here is not a bull-headed man, but a being that physically resembles one, trapped in a constantly shifting hotel that is itself a labyrinth. It feeds not on flesh, but on the faith of its prisoners, exploiting their deepest beliefs until it can consume them. This reframes the entire myth. The Minotaur becomes a metaphor for the traps of blind faith and dogma, and the labyrinth is the psychological prison we build from our own convictions. The creature is pitiable, a captive of its own nature, and the Doctor's solution is not violence but a heartbreaking act of mercy, convincing it to starve itself. This transforms the ancient adversary into a tragic figure, shifting our sympathy from the slayer to the slain. Perhaps the most influential modern portal for the myth is Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series. For millions of young readers and viewers, Riordan is their first guide into the labyrinth. His interpretation is wonderfully layered. The Minotaur, which Percy battles in the very first book, is a real and present danger, a roaring monster on a highway. But later, in the Battle of the Labyrinth, the maze itself becomes a sentient, growing character with its own will and history. Riordan masterfully blends the old archetypes with new characters, like the lost inventor Daedalus reborn in a modern boy, and the labyrinth's essence woven into the fabric of America itself. This does something profound. It makes the ancient mystery feel immediate and personal, showing young audiences that the old stories are not dead relics, but living frameworks for new adventures. These pop culture appearances are not just fun references, they are the myth actively evolving. Each movie, game, or show is a new thread spun from Ariadne's original clue, a new attempt to navigate the meaning of the beast. Sometimes it is a simple monster to conquer. Other times it is a mirror for our own inner demons, a critique of blind belief, or a gateway to adventure for a new hero. Every time we watch or play, we participate in the same ancient ritual, walking the labyrinth once more, deciding for ourselves whether to see a monster, a victim, or something hauntingly in between. The story we began with now glows with a different light, its shadows filled with the shapes of a lost world. So let us return one last time to that sleepy time tale, but hear it now with new ears, its fantasy threaded with whispers of history. A powerful king named Minos ruled a glittering island empire, his palace not a castle of fairy tales, but the vast multi-leveled complex of Knossos, a marvel of painted corridors and advanced engineering that would feel like a maze to any outsider. When he broke his oath to the gods, the punishment was a curse upon his queen, Pasiphae, who was filled with a desire for the magnificent white bull sent by Poseidon. And from that union, the inventor Daedalus fashioned a solution, not with magic, but with the unparalleled craftsmanship of Minoan artisans, whose metalwork and artistry seemed supernatural to later ages. The child born was Asterion, a name meaning the starry one, perhaps a priest-king embodying the celestial bull, Taurus, revered for ensuring the season's turn. But to those who came after, this sacred figure became a monster, the Minotaur. King Minos, ashamed, could not kill his monstrous offspring, so he commanded Daedalus, the genius behind so many wonders, to build a prison of perfect confusion. And Daedalus designed the labyrinth, not a fictional dungeon, but a memory of the palace itself, that sprawling house of the double axe, its sacred Labrys symbols carved into the pillars, its endless ritual corridors a bewildering trap for the uninitiated. Into that heart the Minotaur was cast, its roars echoing not in a mythical void, but in the stone halls of a very real sanctuary. Now King Minos demanded his terrible tribute from Athens, 7 young men and 7 young women every 9 years. This was not mere cruelty, but a mythic echo of a heavy political truth, the draining cost of living under the thalassocracy of a sea empire, where valuable resources and perhaps even hostages were sent to the powerful island kingdom. These youths were thrown into the labyrinth, left to wander the confusing ruins of a civilization they could not comprehend, until they met the beast at its center. The story turns when Prince Theseus, the heroic founder of Athens, volunteered to end the horror. Upon arrival in Crete, Princess Ariadne, daughter of the king, fell in love with him. Desperate to save him, she went to Daedalus, the keeper of the palace's secrets, and asked for a way to conquer the maze. He gave her a simple ball of thread. That night, Ariadne met Theseus. Her gift was not just string, but the ultimate insider knowledge, the guarded layout of the palace, the sacred routes known only to the royal line, or perhaps the navigational secrets of the Minoan Sea lanes themselves. Her betrayal was a devastating act of espionage. Theseus entered the Labyrinth, that vast and ruined palace of a forgotten king, its walls still faintly showing frescoes of bull leapers frozen in their graceful, dangerous dance. He tied the thread to the entrance and let it unwind, transforming a multicursal nightmare into a single, navigable path. He found the Minotaur in its lair, not a mindless beast, but perhaps the final, twisted memory of a bull-masked priest, or a star-crowned ruler, or the very earth-shaking power of the Thera volcano, its horn-shaped island having unleashed apocalypse. After a fierce struggle, Theseus slew the monster with his sword. Then he did the one thing no tribute had ever done. He followed the glimmering thread back through the twisting darkness, leading the other Athenians to safety. They fled Crete with Ariadne, and in that escape they did not just kill a monster. They severed the thread of Minoan control, symbolically ending an era where their people were devoured by a distant, magnificent, and mysterious power. The myth, in its elegant, terrifying simplicity, had preserved the bones of history all along, waiting for us to listen more closely to the old story. We have walked the palace corridors and traced the threads of history, yet the Minotaur slips back into shadow. The evidence is compelling, a mosaic where every piece fits, but the complete picture of the Minoan mind remains just out of reach. We have a plausible maze in the ruins of Knossos, a sacred bull in their art, a cataclysm in the sea, and a conqueror's story in the myth. These layers build a powerful case that the legend is a ghost story told about a real, magnificent civilization. But the ghost itself, the historical Minotaur, is a composite, a shimmering mirage made from equal parts forgotten religion, geological trauma, and political propaganda. It is the echo of a bull's roar in a collapsing temple, the memory of a king's power carved in horned stone, and the monster a rising nation needed to define itself against. So what still lies in the dark, waiting for a thread to guide us to it? The greatest mystery is not the monster, but the people who created its world. What did the Minoans truly believe when they painted those leaping figures? Were they honoring a god, performing a rite of passage, or enacting a cosmic drama? The serene faces in the frescoes give nothing away. Their rituals are silent to us. Then there is the locked door of their language. Linear sits in museum cases, a beautiful, infuriating cipher. Until someone cracks its code, the Minoans have no voice. We cannot hear their laws, their poetry, or their own name for the bull god. Their truth is trapped in those symbols, and the Minotaur guards the door. We must also ask if the mighty eruption of Thera was the single, final blow. Did it shatter their world in a day, leaving them weak for the Mycenaean takeover? Or was it a catastrophic event in a longer, slower decline, a wound from which a sophisticated society could not recover? The ash layer is a fact, but its true impact on the human spirit of Crete is a story we can only guess. This lack of a definitive answer is not a failure of history, it is the very engine of the mystery. It is what keeps us digging both in the earth and in the old stories. The historical Minotaur is elusive because it was never one thing. It is a mirror, and in it we see the fears and wonders of everyone who has ever looked, the Minoan priest seeking the divine, the Mycenaean warrior seeing a rival's strange power, the Greek storyteller weaving a tale of order over chaos, and even our own modern search for identity in a confusing world. The monster endures not because we solved it, but because we never quite can. It waits in the labyrinth, not for a hero with a sword, but for the next curious mind to pick up the thread and walk into the dark once more. So the next time you hear a tale of a monster in the dark, listen a little closer. That shiver down your spine might not just be fear of the imaginary, but the faint echo of a real world knocking from the other side of time. The Minotaur teaches us that our oldest stories are rarely just stories. They are cryptic history books written in the language of symbol and nightmare, preserving the bones of lost kingdoms, fallen gods, and earth-shattering events long after the scribes have turned to dust. They are the way a civilization remembers its own birth, its traumas, and the mysterious people it surpassed. Look at the myth of Atlantis, a sunken empire of advanced technology. Could that be a memory of the Minoans themselves, drowned by the Thera tsunami? Consider the Cyclops, a one-eyed giant. Might that be an ancient Greek stumbling upon the skull of a prehistoric elephant, its large nasal cavity mistaken for a single central eye socket? Every dragon guarding a hoard, every sorcerer in a tower, every sunken city might hold a kernel of a forgotten truth, a geological event, a misunderstood technology, or a fallen enemy culture waiting to be decoded. The world is filled with sleepy time tales, and each one is an invitation to wonder, to question, and to look past the monster to see the history hiding in its shadow. So as you drift off tonight, think of the stories you know. Which one feels like it has something more to say? Share in the comments which historical mystery you would like us to explore together next. And if you enjoyed this journey from fairy tale to forgotten world, subscribe for more sleepy time tales where we turn out the lights but keep the curiosity burning. Sweet dreams and pleasant mysteries.